Right, right. The point that was mentioned earlier around the loneliness, right? That struck me, and it struck me because as fellows, YFI fellows, who better than us, who have gone through the whole cycle of loneliness, right?
Yeah.
Being in that location, away from most of our friend circle, social circle, and we all go through that phase, right? Where we don't have anybody to talk to, we don't have a lot of connections happening, we don't have a lot of activities happening in a very urban sense of it, but maybe that's the reason why all of us can connect to those things, those to those films and content that reflects a part of us.
So I just want to connect the dots with the loneliness part. So just to start with that, I mean, it's a bit heavier topic. So I mean, trigger warning for anyone who's sort of in it for at this point. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you for everyone being here. Largely, I just want to touch upon this one recommendation that I want to give also as a podcast recommendation today, which is so there is this podcaster named Amit Varma who runs this podcast called The Seen and the Unseen, right? And
Yes.
recently he had this episode with this other guy named Nikhil Taneja, and the topic of the conversation was the loneliness of Indian men, right?
Mm.
And I'll just set up the context for this one because what they talk about, it's a 7 hour long conversation, just for anyone who's thinking of listening to it. Imagine how they would have
Oh,
recorded this, by the way. But
7 hour is even high for Amit Varma. He usually goes till 3 hours,
three,
four
four
hours.
hours, yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, the number of threads these guys touch on, and as you can also guess from the idea of the loneliness of Indian men as they talk about, this is a topic where it's already a lot discussed regarding women, like, right? But what they talk about largely is sort of the fact that women are not the only victims of patriarchy. Like men are also to a certain extent diminished by it, right? So and it touches various aspects of this. So for example, one thing they talk about is that, for example, the idea of feminism, right? And I know this is a topic which I wouldn't want to play a lot around with, but see, feminism according to me had a beautiful definition, and it created these spaces for women across, as the internet also came, connected everyone across multiple societies, where they realized that there are societies where it's a matriarchal society also, right? And because of this arc, there were a lot of women that came ahead, and there were spaces where they could discuss issues that they're going through. But at the same time, what is not discussed a lot is the fact that somehow the idea of these online spaces was actually very toxic for men, at least. And I'll put an example for this case. So you go to Instagram, right? And you find any of your female friend and go to their like Instagram and see, like, if they even post a picture of a sandwich, right? So usually the comments are like, "Yay, go girl! What an amazing sandwich!" But the moment any of the guy friends will put anything like that, it's always like, "Hey, Lodu, kya kar raha hai?" I mean, this whole idea of that, it's always like even these coveted spaces where people are talking about issues, it's always anti-women mostly, but which is not the idea of feminism, right? So that is
Yeah.
one of the topics they discussed, that somehow there needs to be some intervention in this space, and also to realize that because of what patriarchy defines the idea of success as, a lot of men also go into these spaces where they have to actually push themselves more than it's required, and that's a topic which I rarely feel anyone is discussing. So that's one thing I wanted to bring up. So, and another thing connecting to this is also like the mental health, largely. I feel the language also plays a big barrier, at least in India. Like there are scientific terms for it, like mental health, we can say mansik swasthya, right? But what is the colloquial term for mental health or something like depression in any language? And there is none, largely because if you say like I am depressed, Hindi में it's like मैं दुखी हूँ, but दुखी is not same as depressed, right?
Mm.
So that also I feel creates that bridge for us to also access these resources.
So that's a fascinating, point also. I actually had not considered that. I think the penetration, or at least the idea of mental health in India, is very restricted even in urban areas, and especially for men. And I think when you go down a little bit, like into the more deeper trenches of the Indian society, I feel, yeah, there is a huge translation issue where it, doesn't translate to Hindi properly at all, or the more vernacular languages. I actually had not considered that.
Yeah, I think when you talk about loneliness and mental health in the same breath, they are very congruent to each other in that sense that uh, a lot of things that we experience as young people in our age group is something very commonplace across the board, uh, uh, which shows up as anxiety or depression, has to do a lot with how isolated we feel as people sometimes, uh, which is cause for loneliness, of course. And as humans, we have biologically evolved to be in communities, to be able to share our emotions and our feelings with other people, to function better. And somewhere in the modern world, this kind of isolation has become a syndrome of some sorts that has been that is being desperately being replaced by technology or other kinds of addictions as well, which don't really compensate for the inherent loneliness you feel. I think it's a syndrome for the modern human being, and I think it's a new area that the human beings have to evolve out of at some point as we grow as a civilization as well.
I'd like to add to this actually, and getting back onto the content idea, I guess. There's this channel called Kurzgesagt. I'm sure most of you are familiar,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but they've made a video talking about loneliness, and I think more especially in the modern era. And it's a fantastic video. I think it's brilliant. It helped me a lot back in the day when I think I was struggling with,
Hmm.
mental health concerns of my own. But they do shed light on this exact thing you were talking about. Why, even though in the modern society we're more connected than we've ever been in the past, and we have access to more people and more connections, you know, than we ever could have even imagined, why do we still feel so lonely? Why is loneliness or depression more prevalent now than it ever was in the past? Uh, and it's a fantastic thing to think about because we've evolved as a society, as a human society, to need social, connections around us. Because back in the caveman era, if you didn't have a tribe protecting you, you are going to die. To the forces of nature or to the elements. And so we've had that kind of inbuilt, programmed into us over the years that we need to have people around. But when you're living in an urban era, you're living in Tokyo, for example, you're going to go back to your one bedroom apartment and you're going to be all alone over there until you go to work the next day and you're a bunch of like 100 people sitting in cubicles who barely ever talk to each other unless there's some work to get done. It's harkening back to the same problem that we had when we were cavemen, that I don't know that there's a tribe around me to protect me when I and
Yeah.
that it propagates a lot of loneliness, a lot of depression in the bottom line. And
Yeah,
it,
I
it
think
is
it's
something that we have to evolve out of.
yeah. I think it's also like I wanted to also bring from the larger idea of loneliness to also the fact that the whole idea of patriarchy also like creates a lot of asymmetry of resources for specifically men to sort of reach out to each other on these ideas. Like for example, just the idea of success, right? Like for me, I personally feel, and a lot of friends that I know, I'm sure you would also know that like there are times when there is this inherent pressure to be productive, right? On a weekend, you're like you need to be productive, and like for me the whole idea is that why can't you just chill and reach out to people and have a good time? Like how many of times have you reached out to one of your guy friend, be like, hey man, I love you, stuff like that? That's I don't think that's sort of out there, and maybe there is a space where we can normalize it largely. So because one of the quotes I think from the same podcast that I was talking about was that patriarchy definitely to a certain extent benefits men, not to deny that fact, but it punishes the men for being the boys they were at certain point.
I think in urban areas, or at least in more metropolitan settings, that discussion has started, and a lot of uh, you know men, or even adolescent boys. I'm talking more in this context. I'm saying, but people in general have been starting to take mental health more seriously as the awareness is spreading. So there is, I think, there is an idea surrounding, breaking out of a lot of societal norms that have been there in the past. Like you can't reach out to a male friend and say, "Hey, are you doing okay? Is everything? I love you." You know, but that's happening. That's happening now, and I've seen that change already for me personally in the past maybe 4 or 5 years, and it will happen. But I think, like Rudresh rightfully said, there is an issue of where that doesn't translate down to, I guess, where the majority of the people, at least in India, live. Where not only is the idea not there, but the translation or the word, the metric isn't even there.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
for a lot of
So,
guys, it's non-existent. Like it's as it's rightfully said. I think it's a consequence of the conditioning that patriarchy brings in. That you, it's for you, it's not even right to speak about loneliness, or it's not even right to speak about failures, or as simple as it's very wrong to cry as a man. And that's something that is, that is held as guilt amongst a lot of guys and men around us. I encounter a lot of people like this who act, very macho in a social setting, hiding everything under them. And I can just, sometimes I can read through all of that and see that, what's his story? Like, why is this guy like this?
I just wanted to say that it's a very unhealthy thing, and I think it propagates or even like kind of further continues that cycle where if in general if men already feel insecure that there are certain things that they can't achieve or there are certain things that they can't do, they're keeping a lot of emotions in check that are, you know, it's bound to come out in all the wrong outlets, in all the wrong places, that all of that
yeah,
bottled
yeah.
up
Sorry,
in
just
energy.
cutting you off a little bit there. I think what you're saying also, just like there is a connection with this, I'm sure, with Bollywood, right, or the mainstream media, which is
Of
how a
course, yeah.
lot of stuff is portrayed. Men being the macho, whatever, like that's out there. Which, as you rightly said, it's also changing. I guess there are movies where like the leads are not necessarily men, but they're called, like, if there's a movie which is a male-led movie, he's the hero. At the same time, it's a movie where the protagonist is female. It's female-led movie. It's not, so many of those points make such a big difference.
Wasn't
Yeah.
there a wasn't there a Kareena Kapoor movie? I don't remember who the actor was, but didn't they like swap gender roles or normative gender roles? But I think Kareena Kapoor was the breadwinner and the guy was the house husband or the homemaker. I
Right,
Yes,
right.
that was Arjun Kapoor and Kareena Kapoor movie. I
Yeah,
forgot.
I sorry, I don't watch a lot of movies and especially Bollywood,
Key
so
and
I'm
Ka, I
not.
think. Key and Ka, if I
Yeah,
remember
yeah, yeah.
correctly. Key
That's the
and Ka.
one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that we're already kind of moving in that general direction. It's going
Right.
to take a lot of time before the
Yeah.
majority of India kind of backs it up. But at least, starting the discussion on these certain things, especially in mainstream media, is the only way. Do you remember? I think maybe 5 or 6 years, maybe a little before that. I think when the whole gender as a spectrum was being advocated, the
Hmm.
initial
Yeah.
response to that was so aggressive by so many people, even left oriented. It was so aggressive. But over time, like I've started to see, in fact, the place I've joined currently to start working, everyone has their pronouns in their email signature. And I thought that was fantastic. These are people who are like 55, 60 years old. And we, at least starting the discussion, even though it might have been really energetic and angry at the time, we've made some progress. We're going in a certain way where we're trying to stop ostracizing people for being, who or what they are at. So like I said, just starting the conversation by this, even if the movie doesn't do very well or the content isn't reviewed very positively, it's at least bringing the discussion to the table and saying, hey, this is a thing, let's talk about it. I just wanted to bring
So,
up
so
one more thing for any
yeah,
listener who might
yeah,
be like struggling with some mental health concerns of your own.
yeah.
And this is, coming from first-hand experience, something that really helped for me, especially, was going online and looking up communities on the internet, Discord, Reddit, Facebook, even. They have a lot of places where people can come together and maybe like share mutually some of the stories that they've been struggling with in the past, and it helps to really normalize that for you, even if you've been diagnosed, or if you haven't, if you're just struggling with depression in general. There are a lot of places.
Can you recommend any? Uh,
Well, I'm very active on the ADHD subreddit, and I think it's really fantastic. The only problem is people on the ADHD subreddit tend to write a lot, and ADHD patients can't read a lot. So there's a little dichotomy there. But
Paradox.
apart from that, it really helped me, understand that there's a sense of community around it, and there's an idea that it kind of normalized it for me.